Thanks, Harmony. Well, we are glad you are here today. We were going to nerd out and talk about evaluation and outcomes and program measurements. And I do want this to be interactive. You are welcome to ask questions as we go. We can talk about real life examples, and we can try to save some time at the end to actually chat through some real life examples if y'all want to do that. But in true nerdy fashion, I am going to start us out with a quick little poll here in Zoom. So humor me and answer my quick little poll questions here. Oh no, we have an enemy. All right, you and Data, are you friends? Are you frenemies? Are you enemies? How do you and Data get along? Data who? It's looking like we got love-hate relationships going on here. All right. Everybody get a chance to answer our questions? Do you need another quick second? Don't overcomplicate the short answer question. Keep it general. Okay. I'm going to close this out here in a couple seconds. Okay. So can you all see the results? Can you see that on your screen? Yeah. Okay. So it looks like we got love-hate relationships mostly. We got a few people who are enemies with Data. And then let me view the details here on. Okay, so for outcomes measured, we have positive identity development. And then we have some outputs around number of events and students served. And then we have a qualitative survey from students and community partners. Awesome. So this is actually really good information for me as we head into this training here. So I was telling Harmony that at 4 o'clock yesterday, I decided to ditch the PowerPoint slides that I was going to use at 4 p.m. the night before. Brilliant, my most brilliant idea yet. And I decided to make a guide that would hopefully be usable more long-term. So we're going to use a couple different tools today in addition to some web resources. So let me get my video all situated here so I can see if there's questions and hand raises and all of that. So I put together a quick little toolkit, and disclaimer, I did make it starting at 4 o'clock yesterday, so it's not completely pretty yet. So don't judge me. We're going for content here. So let's start by talking about big picture. Really where you should start with program evaluation is having a really strong theory of change model, because that drives what you should be measuring in all other aspects, whether it's output or outcomes. A strong theory of change model is really where you should begin. So you can use the chat or raise your hands, give me a thumbs up, a thumbs down. Who has a strong theory of change model that they have to use? Or maybe a thumbs down is like, theory of change what? We don't have that. Thumbs down. I see a thumbs down. I see a thumbs up. I see a sort of. Okay. Well, a theory of change model is really just a way to visually display what you're shooting for. So I'm going to start by showing you this picture, and this is actually more of a logic model. So logic models and theory of change models are very, very similar. Honestly, very similar. I would say a logic model is more of a written format, sort of like this. It's a table kind of or column format. And a theory of change model is a more complex or visual representation of where you want to start. I prefer um, doing theory of change because it suggests that you work from right to left. So often when we're building things, we actually work left to right. But in this case, we really want to start with impact. So what is that big picture for you? What does success look like? What is your mentoring program trying to achieve? Is there a societal issue you're trying to address? Um, what does the research tell you about the likelihood of that? So um, somebody share with me what sort of impact you might be shooting for. Big picture, societal. What is your program shooting for? There's some examples on the screen too.
I guess just that students don't feel alone.
Okay. So maybe connectedness,
Yeah.
loneliness, lack of loneliness. Are there other things we're shooting for?
We have some things in the chat: free education for our
Oh,
students, less impact from trauma, trauma education for foster families, and specialized activities for the children.
love that. I love that. So what's the in terms of Beth, I'm curious, what is the issue you're trying to solve with trauma education for foster families? Is it so that we're creating more compassionate environments? Is it to create a healing space? How would you translate that to big picture?
I would say for the families, it's a trauma, and this has not been implemented yet. This is just an idea that we're working on, and it would be so parents would be receiving not only a support organically that would grow a support group within this program, but also receiving trauma-informed education. So which I would think would be really well received, in how you deal with the children. And then during the same time, the kids are receiving specialized recreational things that they're getting with mentors. So this is kind of hitting, it's a 2-unit thing. You've got the parents and then you've got the kids, right? So this is kind of tackling both things.
Yeah.
And so we hope to, in doing that, and then the mentors, again, organically, that will grow, the older ones helping with the younger ones, and then the mentors that are going to be available with each different activities they're doing. And these are activities like simulated golf, skiing, different things that normally they might not have access to.
Sure.
And so by doing that, we're hoping to, create a healing within them and within the family unit as a whole, and hoping to make change there. And of course, that provides, healing, prevention. It's just all kinds of bennies would come out of that. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that, Beth. And the example on the screen here, the second little box under impact, really you're striving to create healthy families, right? We're all striving to create healthy families, healthy communities, because healthy people are healthy people are more likely to not be in trouble, right? Get good jobs or have a better chance of getting a good job, right? Living wage job and being able to provide for healthy families. So the reality is we in our programs, particularly, let's say you're serving 9-year-olds, you're not going to be able to measure long-term impact, right? So few programs have the ability to do like crazy big research projects that really study long-term impact, right? There are a few out there for the mentoring field. Most of us don't have the time or the money to do those kinds of projects, right? Or maybe the desire. They're a lot of work. Maybe we don't have the desire to do those kind of projects. So The good news is some of that research has already been done that connects the things that need to be in place in order for impact to happen, right? So let's run with the example of a living wage career. We know that a few things are true from research and data. We know that you are more likely to make a higher income level as an adult if you have post-secondary education attainment, whether that's a college degree or some sort of certification or license in a trade. You are more likely to have a better paying job, right? We also know that, again, a lack of a criminal history is also a good indicator from a data perspective and from a common sense life perspective, right? That you are more likely to have better opportunities and more opportunities for jobs if there isn't some sort of criminal record. So that's what I mean when we say we work backwards, right? So let's think about our big picture impact, and then let's think about our program model. And you have to think about what kids you're serving, what ages you're serving, what is your really program designed to do? And so I think step one for all of you is making sure that your organization has a really strong theory of change model. It can be a process, right? And I would encourage you to not just sit down at your desk behind a computer screen by yourself and build one, but to actually put a team of folks together, whether that be program staff, whether that be maybe a board member or two, but you want maybe a parent or two in your program, but you really want a broad lens of understanding of your program in order to be able to put that together. So you can see then if we continue to work right to left, we go past outcomes, and we're actually going to look at some outcome examples later in different tools and surveys that you can use to go through that. But then the next column to the left is outputs. And I would say that outputs and outcomes get confused regularly. So outcomes require a change. So outcomes is an increase in something, a decrease in something. Sometimes actually maintenance is positive. So what do I mean by that? So there's something called the maturation process that happens with kids. As they get older, different behaviors and attitudes tend to decline. So I'm a 9-year-old. I love school. I love going to school. I want to go to school. I love my friends. I love my teachers. It's a happy place. I hit middle school. Maybe I'm not as interested. I do go because I want to see my friends, but like, meh, I could take it or leave it. By high school, I'm like, not feeling it. I'd rather sleep in. I'd rather play my video games. I'd rather, and this is of course me exaggerating the example a little bit, right? Just to prove the point. But over time, this young person's idea and positivity towards school declines. So when you have a situation where you have a young person in your mentoring program and you are actually able to maintain their excitement for school, maintenance is the good thing, right? When most of their peers are declining in their attitudes or behaviors, it could be use of substances, that sort of thing, right? So a maintenance of a young person not using substances is a good thing, right? So you don't need to have an increase if that comparison is typically a decrease, right? So maintenance is sometimes okay, but typically an outcome is going to require more of, less of, increase, decrease, some sort of change, right? Where an output is a straight up number of something. So it's the number of matches you have, the number of mentors you've trained, the number of hours that have happened in your mentoring program, the number of activities that you're hosting, the number of this, the number of that. Not a change, not a increase or decrease. So, but there are times where you have an increase or a decrease in those numbers. So let's say you have an increase in hours of mentoring. That's not actually an outcome. It is change, right? Like you have more hours of mentoring happen, but it's not an outcome because it's just an output, an increased output of services. The outcome of that might be the increase in hours of mentoring is more dosage, which means you're elevating your possibilities to improve hope or self-confidence or something else, right? So it's the hope, the self-confidence that's the outcome, but the hours of mentoring is just an output. Does that make sense? If folks, sometimes that can be a tough one to grapple with. Any questions about that? Okay. And then when you continue moving to the left, then you have the activities and the inputs. So those first three columns, inputs, activities, and outputs, are what's technically referred to as the theory of action. Those are the things that have to happen. Those are the things that have to take place in order for you to achieve the outcomes and the impact that you want, which is the change part, right? So you have theory of action, theory of change. Theory of action requires resources. Inputs are staff. Inputs would be money. Inputs might be a curriculum, or maybe you need a building where your mentoring takes place. You need the people, you need youth, right? So that is an input. Even things like, it's a good example, supplies, like anything like that. The activities are the things that you do internally or externally to make the work happen. So that could be mentor recruitment, mentor training, screening, the matching that you go through, your monthly support contacts, the match activities that you provide, staff training, professional development, mentor training. All of those things are activities that you do that then give you the measurements of outputs that get you to your outcomes. And I know that this process can feel really overwhelming sometimes. So if your program, I would say Mentor Washington, we can offer our support in a couple different ways. Let's say you have an existing theory of change and you really just like some feedback or to chat through it, or you want us to review it, happy to do that. If your program doesn't have a strong theory of change, maybe you don't have one at all, and you would like to build one, we can also do technical assistance support to help with that. So a comment, we've already discussed this, so we're not going to stay on this page too long, but I do want to cover the question of, do we need multiple theory of change models? So prior to Mentor Washington, some of you may know, I actually led a very large youth mentoring program in Washington State, and we had various program models. So we had a community-based one-on-one model that served kids as young as 6 all the way through 18. We had a school-based model that focused just on elementary kiddos, and we had a school-based model that actually focused on career exploration and post-secondary readiness with a very specific set of curriculum activities, field trips, the whole shebang, right? It was very different than our community-based program where mentors pick the kids up at home, et cetera. If you have models that are that different, I would encourage you to have a theory of change for both, because the outcomes that we were looking for our career connected program, our career exploration program, were very different than what we wanted to have happen with our 9 and 10-year-olds in a more social emotional outcome driven space. Does that make sense? So I would say if your program models are very different, that is when you would want to consider having, and that doesn't mean, like, chances are, especially your inputs, some of your activities and your outputs are probably going to overlap quite a bit. So you may be able to have like a template, or maybe you organize it into one theory of change, but you have it organized to where there's, your community-based program outcomes are here and your career connected outcomes are below that, or something like that. I will also say that funders, so if you're applying for grant funding, funders often require theory of change or logic models. So many of you might have them, quote unquote, just from submitting grants, but that doesn't mean that you're actually using them, right? Okay, questions before we jump into the fun stuff. All right, so let's chat outcomes. So these are the changes that we are looking to make. So in this toolkit, our national, Mentor National, has done a great job with the National Mentoring Resource Center of, let's see, how can I do this easily? I'm gonna have to switch screens here a couple times, folks, bear with me. I'm going to share my, that is not the one I want to share. I want to share that one. Sorry. All right, my browser window. Okay, so in that toolkit, if you were to click on the measurement guidance toolkit link, this is where it would take you. And you can see here on the left-hand side, there's all sorts of different categories. So there's a category for measurements around relationship quality, the strength of relationships. There's measurements around program quality or your implementation in terms of program quality. But then there's categories around mental health, social emotional skills, healthy behavior, pro-social behavior. This is going to be a lot of like your, if you're doing juvenile justice work, something like that. Interpersonal relationships and academics, risk and protective factors. There's lots of different options for you to look at. Now, when I first took a look at this tool, I was like, whoa, it's a lot. It feels a little overwhelming. So don't let it overwhelm you. What I would say is go back to your theory of change model. What are those 2 or 3, and I wouldn't put many more on yourself, right? Pick 2 or 3 to really focus on and measure those, right? What do you think you're really impacting? One of the most statistically significant outcomes of community-based mentoring can be a reduction in depressive symptoms. So the program I was in was actually worked with Mentor Washington on this study. It was called The Role of Risk. And we didn't even know we were doing this at the time, to be honest. We weren't intentionally trying to reduce depressive symptoms. But what happens when you get kids out having a fun time, being joyful, connecting with people who unconditionally support them, they look forward to going out and doing a fun activity. Things like your dopamine and serotonin kick in, and they help you to feel better, right? Getting out of the house and doing things. So at the time, we didn't even know we were doing this, right? But it is one of the most statistically significant outcomes for a one-on-one model. So there's questions here around different things you can measure. So let's click on depressive symptoms as an example. You're going to get in here and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, this is a lot. How do I even start? But it'll link you to the actual questions, right? So you can see an example of the questions that you can put into a survey. There's other things around academics. And so, many times when you think of academics, you think of grades or attendance, things like that. But we also know from research that school connectedness is critical for the academic success of young people. So particularly if you're running a school-based program or something like that, school connectedness might be a great thing to measure for your program, because if kids want to come to school, or if they don't have a shot at learning if they don't want to come to school, right? If they're not showing up to school regularly, they're going to significantly reduce their chances of learning. So this is the tool. I would highly encourage you to check it out. The other thing I wanted to share, and Harmony may laugh at me here because I feel like I'm an evangelist for hope. the Science of Hope. Did I share the right thing? I did not. Did I just go back to that same screen? I wanted to go back to, sorry, folks. This one. I am definitely an evangelist for the Science of Hope, and we can absolutely put all of this in. We'll send out materials. You can have this guidebook. You can have all the links. There's an Excel spreadsheet we're going to look at too here in a minute, and you'll get all of this info for sure. So the Child Hope Scale. So there are over 2,000 studies that have been done on the Science of Hope. There is a very short scale. It's like 8 questions, I think, for kids and maybe 10 questions for adults. So very short and sweet. But over 2,000 studies have shown that it is one of the most predictive indicators of well-being. And when I say well-being, I mean emotional, physical, academic, adults, in terms of the workplace. It prevents burnout. You set higher goals for yourself. And hope is not wishful thinking. Hope just quickly is, do I have the willpower or the agency to set goals and achieve goals? And do I have the pathways to get there to my big goals, right? That could be any sort of goals depending on your age, where you're at, all of those things. And what I love about Hope with mentoring is that oftentimes mentors are exposing young people to goals that they didn't even know existed, right? And they're supporting young people in working through a pathway to get to those goals, whether they be academic, emotional well-being, mental health, whatever they may be. So I would highly encourage you, if you're feeling hopeless about what to measure, I would highly encourage you to check out this scale, because it can go so many different directions, and you can teach it, right? So if somebody has low hope, you can teach it, and it can apply to so many different domains. So I'm a huge fan of that. Let's talk quickly about some surveys, some do's and don'ts. So do get consent when you are administering surveys. You can put that in like a parent application, or you can put it in a mentor application, that sort of thing, so that they can provide consent up front in order to give them surveys. I would highly encourage you to use existing tools. Don't make your own up. Making your own up is, they don't have validity in terms of comparing them to other things. And there's so many that exist out there, but they are sometimes age specific. And typically that's because of reading level and comprehension level. So you don't want to give an 8-year-old a survey that was designed to be 13 and older, for example. So on all of those, on the webpage that has all of those outcome measurements, they each do specify age range. So you'll want to make sure of that. I would also say complete them consistently. And in terms of what I mean by this is, you can't really compare apples to oranges if you survey one kid after 3 months of mentoring and another kid after 24 months of mentoring, right? Like 3 months of mentoring may not be enough time for you to see outcomes for young people. So I would encourage you to think about the outcomes that you're measuring in terms, and when you're measuring them in terms of timing of your program. So if a young person needs at least 9 to 12 months of mentoring, you wouldn't expect to see outcomes sooner than that, right? So be mindful of those sort of things. I would also encourage you to use qualitative methods. So those, Likert scale, choose 1 through 5, that's not your only option, right? Like those are great and they're easy to do data collection on, but you're collecting all sorts of other data during match support calls, during interviews, during conversations. So don't be afraid to use that qualitative data as well. Some of the common mistakes that I've seen is surveys can be way too long. And And I think we can all probably admit, even for me, like, I don't want to take some crazy long survey, right? Like I tune it out. I zone out after maybe 20 questions. And kids are probably have an even lower threshold. So be mindful and prioritize to keep your survey short enough. If they're done in person, you can sometimes make them longer, but I would say, especially if you're collecting it digitally, be really mindful of the lengths of your surveys. I also wanted to share a few tools, qualitative measures. That's you. Yes. So, I mean, in terms of grant funding, you're definitely gonna have to have some of those quantitative ones, right? Like funders often require quantitative ones. And I do think quantitative can be helpful for long-term analysis. In terms of qualitative, some of the things I can think of would particularly be around, like you may even be able to see a change in a young person over time, right? So maybe when they first came to your program, they were disengaged with their mentor. They were closed off. They did not want to have a conversation. They were not open to it, right? They were not feeling it. And over time, they warmed up. They felt connection. They started attending programming more, right? And if you do that enough, and I would say qualitative is probably easier if you have a small group. If anytime you start to get a large program, qualitative can become more difficult. There's also ways, I would say, through AI that you can analyze qualitative data to get themes and synthesize information. So if you have it typed out or written out, that may, AI may be a option. I wouldn't say that's a bona fide research method. I would say it's a tool, right? That's in your toolbox. What are folks using now for survey tools or data collection tools that you like or hate? What are y'all using now? Google Forms. Yep. Anyone else? Yeah. Google Forms is a really, yeah, go ahead.
Well, sometimes paper forms, depending on if
Uh-huh.
we're in a place that has internet access. Sometimes we'll just print out a paper one.
Yep. Yeah, especially if you have people captive in a location, that can be an easier method for sure. The downside is then you all have to enter the data. But if it's a short survey, that's probably okay. So some CRMs, for any of you that have databases, sometimes they come with built-in forms. I know SmartSuite has that capability where you can send out questions, and then the nice thing is then it goes straight back into your system, so it's all tracked in one place. So if you have a CRM, you check out and see if forms are a possibility. Some CRMs also connect to things like Google Forms, so you can feed your data into there. So let's talk a little bit about fidelity to your model. What I have seen over and over and over again in my 25 years in the mentoring field is that we have these beautiful theory of change models. We have these outcomes we want to get to. We have the best laid plans. And then reality comes into play, right? People don't always attend at the rate you want them to. Maybe they don't meet as long as you want them to. Maybe relationships close early. Maybe they're just not gelling. There's so many things that come into play to impact your perfect little plan, right? And it doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It just means that sometimes things happen. So how do we make sure that what we're doing is, actually in line with what we say we're going to do? There's different ways to approach that. So I would encourage you to think about different measurements. In addition to your outcomes measures, you can also be measuring things like, I think the output measurements are really easy. Number of this, number of that. We're all typically really good at that. The number of kids we served, the number of mentors trained. We're pretty good at outputs, right? But what about the quality of our work that's happening? What about when you think of the best practices within the elements of effective practice? We know that match support is a critical component. Ongoing support is a critical component of healthy matches long-term or even short-term. Well, like, do you have metrics around how many of those support conversations are happening regularly? Do you have any goals around the quality of those conversations? A match support conversation is not an outgoing email, right? Like it's a two-way dialogue, it's a conversation. So how do you know? How do you know that your match support is effective? How do you know that your processes are efficient? For those of you that are working with especially volunteers, but also when you're bringing families on board, is your enrollment process so cumbersome that you're losing people, right? Have you made it effective in terms of quality, but also simple enough that people can get through the process? So we're going to look at different ways where you can track some metrics to look at the efficiency of your processes. And then one of my favorite things is actually a marketing term, is a net promoter score. So so many products and services we interact with now, people ask us, would you recommend us to your friend, right? Like, I'm a oil changed at Mazda the other day and they asked me, would you recommend us to your friend? That's called a net promoter score. You can also do that, right? So I would encourage you from time to time to send out what I would call satisfaction surveys. So, and this is, Robin, this is where you can get a good qualitative information, right? So you can ask things like, how likely would you be to recommend your friend to our program? Highly likely, highly unlikely. But then you can also have short answer questions in a satisfaction survey that are like, what do you like about the program? Or what would you recommend we improve about our program? What do you like about being a mentor, right? Like, there are different ways that you can ask those open-ended questions that get more to the feel of their experience for interacting with your program. If you do something like a net promoter score, set yourself a goal. If 5 is high and 1 is low, do you want to at least maintain an average of a 4.0? Like, set yourself a goal, set yourself some, I mean, it would be great to have all 5s, probably unrealistic, but it'd be wonderful. So set yourself some goals there. One of the metrics you can track is called a match retention rate. And I think this one is critical. Certainly when it comes to ensuring that we're not doing harm to young people. So Dr. Renee Spencer, whose name you can see here at the bottom as a reminder, she's done a lot of work, a lot of research on youth mentoring, from particularly an early closure, what's called a premature closure, so closing before the length of time it was expected to last. And also on matches that have done harm, like emotional harm. So retention rate is essentially, you can measure it for 6, 9, 12 months, 24 months. You can pick your time range. I did spell it out in this spreadsheet we're going to look at because it can be a little hard to understand in terms of how you calculate it. But essentially what you're trying to figure out is if your expectation is that matches, if you're asking for a 12-month commitment, or if you're asking for a 9-month commitment, whatever that is, it's what percentage of matches are actually getting to that expectation. And yes, you got it. Ashley, CRM is another word for database. So yeah, retention rates can be critical in terms of understanding how many of your matches are really getting close to that expectation, because we know that premature closures can actually cause more harm to young people, particularly young people who might already be dealing with abandonment experiences from prior experiences. So I would say if you have to, there's tons of things you could measure, but I would highly encourage you to measure retention rate. Okay, so now we're gonna really dive into the nerdy stuff here, people. So bear with me. I'm gonna open a spreadsheet. Don't get overwhelmed. Does anybody like just love Excel? I love Excel. Anybody? I love it. Makes me happy. Excel is my happy place. So I made this last night. As I told you, I completely redid my thinking starting at 4 p.m. yesterday. Willie, you missed that fun part. I decided to go a completely different route for today, starting at 4 o'clock yesterday. So I know this is really tiny. We're going to send this out so you'll be able to blow it up to your reading pleasure. But I wanted to make it interactive. So I wanted you to be able to plug in your own data if you have it, even if your first stab at it is your best guess, right? So we're going to start pretty simple. Some of these are mostly outputs, right? These are mostly outputs. So how many you served? Typically, you look at a year at a whack. Maybe that's a calendar year. Maybe that's a school year, right? But you served is traditionally defined as they were served at any point in that period. So if you look at children served for 2023, most of these examples are looking at calendar year 2023. They were open one day in 2023, or they were open all 365 days in 2023, but you served them in 2023. So, you know, you can fill in that number. And a lot of these calculations they come from some of these numbers filled in. So if you don't see it calculated, it may be missing another number. Active matches is, you know, how many were open. So just because you served 150 last year doesn't mean that you had 150 open every single day, right? So you served speaks to your breadth of service, and active matches speaks to, say, caseload size today. So active matches really dictates what your staffing model should be like, because just because you serve a larger amount doesn't mean that that's how many are open on any given day. I'm going to skip through some of these that I think are maybe a little more obvious, but retention rate, and if you have any questions about any of these, feel free to pipe in. But retention rate is probably one of the more complicated things to measure. And when I say this, I'm going to admit it took me probably 10 years to understand how this was calculated at my last program. And then one day it just clicked and I was like, oh, so you're going to need 2 figures to calculate this. If we want to understand our retention rate for 2023, your sample of data is actually going to be all of the new matches that you made in 2022. So you essentially want to look at, did they have the possibility to hit 12 months? So you don't want to look at all of your matches. You just want to look at those that you want to know recently who had the opportunity to hit 12 months. So you're going to look at all of your new matches from 2022, and then you're going to say, how many of them were open at least 12 months? Did they hit that 12-month mark? And then those 2 figures, you're going to divide how many hit 12 months divided by the total. And that's going to give you your retention rate. And I would say really strong retention rates are going to be north of 75%. Average is probably going to be more around 70%. And I would say anything below 65, and whether this is 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, anything below that, you should really start to look at some of your screening practices or support practices and say, what's going wrong? Like, what's happening here? Why are so many matches dropping off? Because there is the possibility that you do emotional harm to young people when you don't get it right. You're never going to have 100% retention. If you do, like it's some sort of miracle. You know, people move, people change jobs, like all sorts of things happen. Closures don't always have to be bad, right? They don't always have to be negative. and some are even expected when kids graduate or things like that. But I think this is an important one to understand. This next batch of metrics, we're not going to go over these in depth, but this next batch of metrics really speak to processing and efficiency, particularly at the stage of enrollment. So if you need 100 mentors, or let's say you need 25 new mentors, you may need to start with 100 potential names, because we know that not all of them are going to follow through. They can't make the time commitment. They're not interested any longer, or whatever that may be, right? But when you're using volunteers, 100% of them don't always follow through. So you'll want to understand how many of them actually convert to or yield to actual matches. We already talked about Net Promoter Score. There's that example here. And then the last example I want to talk about is match support done. So for newer matches, one of the best practices is to have those conversations, support conversations monthly, right? And if you're in a school-based program, you may not interact with the parents, guardians as much as you would in a community-based program. So use this example for your program, right? But for example, if you have 82 active matches, that means you have 82 mentors and 82 young people and potentially 82 parents that you need to check in with. So it's actually 82 times 3 that needs conversations that need to happen every month, which is 246 conversations. It's a lot of conversations. So you can actually, and then how many of those actually took place? How many people did you actually get a hold of? And this, what I like about this metric is it can sometimes speak to whether your caseloads are reasonable. Like, do you have appropriate staffing levels? And if that number is really low, like maybe you have an engagement issue. Like, why aren't people calling you back beyond the like normal, sometimes phones get disconnected, numbers change, things like that. But this can also speak to engagement and whether they want to check in with you, right? So what does that engagement look like? So in this example, or in this spreadsheet, you can see that I defined it. I tried to also share what the significance of the metric is, and then I used example data for you to think through that. So, question.